But on with culture wars. Well, look, it's so bizarre. All this misinformation around about Israel, the government says nothing, okay? Meanwhile, it's pushing a misinformation bill so tough on the rest of us that lawyers are warning that people accused of misinformation by the government's watchdog under this bill will have fewer protections against self-incrimination than even suspected murderers. Apparently, they can't say, according to one lawyer at least, they can't say like an accused murderer, look, I have the right to silence. The government's media regulators will have the power to compel anyone who thinks helps spread alleged misinformation, on the pandemic or whatever, to testify at a time and place it decides or face fines of more than $9,000 a day. Joining me is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia and host of Outsiders on Sky News on Sundays at 9 a.m. Great show. Rowan Dean, thank you for your time. What is this government up to?
Well, it's really scary, Andrew, and you're right to mention the misinformation going around about Israel and Palestine and so on, because we saw during The Voice the fact that the ACT, the Canberra government, the bureaucrats, are basically completely out of touch with mainstream Australia, and in fact they think the complete opposite of what mainstream Australia says. They were the only place that voted yes to The Voice, the only place in the entire country, and yet they run all our bureaucracies and they make all our laws. We are at an extremely dangerous period in time here, because you can pretty much guarantee that, for example, if the government were able to control what is the truth, remember it was Jacinda Ardern who said that the truth is what the government tells you and nothing else. If we had a government in Canberra that was decided to tell you what the truth is, and that was a Labor government with run by the likes of Penny Wong and Tony Burke, I reckon it'd be a pretty safe bet, London to a brick, that they would see things occurring in Gaza from a very different light to how the rest of the nation does, and they would act accordingly. This disinformation bill gives the government bureaucrats, and worse than that, we saw the other day, I showed on Outsiders, how Malcolm Roberts had shown during COVID, it wasn't just the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats employed spotty art directors and copywriters at M&C Saatchi, an ad agency, to decide what was the truth. I mean, I've worked in advertising. You don't ask ad people what the truth is, trust me. But there what they were. They were giving $1 million a year to a group of advertising people to tell big tech what was or wasn't the government's line on the truth. And they often got it wrong, more often than not. And they, in fact, had members of parliament being censored and spied on by an ad agency. Well, this misinformation bill would be that on steroids. Margaret Cunneen, our brightest legal mind in this country, has come out and said that the government's misinformation and disinformation bill, Andrew, would put everyday Australians in worse positions than murderers or arsonists in terms of their ability to remain silent or to follow basic presumption of innocence rules. Now, if Margaret Cunneen is warning about this, trust me, we should be very, very scared. Let's not forget that Margaret Cunneen and her family suffered from bureaucrat overreach during the New South Wales ICAC hearings, where you had goons marching through their house, going through all their computers and so on. This is what this bill will do, misinformation, disinformation bill. You will be fined around 10 grand a day if you refuse to comply. It's Stasi-like, Andrew.
It's extraordinary. It's so impertinent, really. But listen, we talked last week, and this touches on it, the voice thing you mentioned before. We talked about how the government, how the Liberal Party, the opposition, could win another campaign, and maybe the election, by doing the same sort of campaign against the government's green energy revolution in the same areas, working class, outer suburbs, country, using the same pitch against the elites that it did to defeat The Voice. And today, I was amazed. The Essential poll, which is a left-wing organisation, they did a poll. They found a rise in support for the Liberals' campaign for nuclear power, now 50% support against 33% against. That's the government's position, against. I mean, I'm stunned that the public is swinging so hard towards nuclear power and in revolution, I think, against the government's green energy fantasy. What do you make of all this?
Well, I'm not stunned at all, Andrew, and that number will go higher. It will also hit 60-40 in favour of nuclear before the next election. The reason being, I argued with you that on the show that if you took every single cultural issue, every single one of them, and held a referendum on them, you would get that same 60-40 split everywhere apart from Canberra, of course, which would be the other way around. And that would, every cultural issue, you name it, you would get at least a minimum of 60-40. If it was the transgender, gender fluidity issue, it would go through up to the 90s. But on nuclear and climate change, it's a solid 60-40, I would argue, easily, because the more information that the coalition puts out there, as they did with the Voice, the more information smart Australians who aren't necessarily politically engaged, who used to trust Labor and political parties, but are now seeing that Labor is completely untrustworthy, they would look at the facts and go, oh, here's another con job by that same Labor government, that same
Correct.
Albanese and those clowns who tried to pull the wool over our eyes over the Voice. They're at it again. They're trying to pull the wool over our eyes on wind farms up and down our coast outside New South Wales, Port Stephens. They're trying to pull the wool over our eyes with transmission lines throughout our beautiful, great farming lands. They're trying to pull out the wool over our eyes on every single cultural issue. And Australians are not morons. Australians will not vote for this Labor government at the next election if the Liberal Party fight on every single one of these cultural issues, Andrew. I guarantee it.
Yes, and it's all to prosecute a left-wing, inner-urban religious spasm, and it's got to be fought. Rowan Dean, thank you for your time.